Welcome to PM Bootcamp, the second session. Today we are going to be talking about delivery smell. So what are the little cues we can pick up from a room and from an environment that tell us that there might be something not quite right with delivery? This is kind of six senses that you will have developed anyway, but these are some ones that I've collected from around ThoughtWorks, from people like Pam Stone and others who have the best noses in the business for this stuff. Then we're going to go into a section about delivering bad news, and particularly we're going to talk about that conversation which kind of goes, we're going to be late. So regardless of whether you really think you're late or anything like that, we're going to go through some steps and things to keep in mind when you're having that conversation. And we're also going to talk about how to prevent the need for that conversation. I do hope to do a bit of a series about delivery conversations. I reckon there's kind of 5 or 6 that repeat on you. I've been doing this for, I don't know, 25 years or something like that. And I feel like some of these I've had over and over and over and over again. And this is one of the ones, I think it's one that comes up for people, and it's one that can be particularly terrifying. So that's what we're going to discuss today. So is that really pointing just at the wall?
It's got you centralized.
Oh, okay, cool. Got it. All right. So like I say, questions drive this, so please ask questions. If you have a question in your mind, I'll bet you $10, not really, I'm not paying, that someone else has got it as well. So no such thing as a dumb question in this room. And I really urge you to ask those questions because other people will be wondering the same thing, I'll bet. And it opens up discussion. And although I do have some points here for discussion, honestly, you don't want to have an hour of me just talking at you. That's awful. All right, let's just dive right into it. So I'm going to discuss a few of these kind of delivery smells, and then I will ask you, I'm sure that you also have some of these that you... Dan Sampson-Gower is starring today as our slide advancer.
Thank you.
Okay, so delivery smells. This is sort of the stuff where if you walk into a team environment and you want to suddenly very quickly get a sense of what's going on, these are not sort of reliable indicators, black and white, everything's broken. We don't work religiously like that. But these are just little things that you might notice that people in this company who have been around doing this very well for a while suggested were important. This one's really interesting. I definitely get this one. So you walk into the team room and you say, like, how's it going? How's the deadline going? And people say, well, look, we're hoping the code will drop from the other team on Thursday, and then we hope the environment is ready. And then we're hoping that the delivery manager will give us the green light to go into the testing environment. Like, you just hear that word hope too many times. That ain't quite right, potentially. It means that there's risks there that may not be being acknowledged and dealt with. So remember, a risk is just an issue that hasn't happened to you yet. It's something that could happen. So if you're saying that you hope, like in that sentence, I think there was like 4 or 5 things that you hoped were going to turn out right. One of those is definitely not going to. And if your plan relies on those, all of those being right, well, then you're probably in trouble. So just listen for that word, and it's a good one to kind of poke into. Also from teams who are working near you, if you want to get a sense of perhaps if their work might be at risk, and that could be affecting you or the greater program. Remember from last time we talked about the 4 Ps, projects, products, programs, and portfolios. A lot of the stuff today that I'm talking about is particularly relevant in what's called program work, where there's multiple streams of work that are kind of aligned toward a similar goal. So hope is a smell. The J-curve is a smell. This one is fantastic. You don't I don't know whether the burn-ups are cool anymore, if there's still burn-ups around. But basically, this is the idea of the J-curve, which is like, you look at the team's burn-up and their performance so far has been like this. But in the next iteration, it magically, no underpants goes like this. And it's always the next iteration is always going like that. And if it does go like that, then we will get to the goal. So again, that might well be true. That could be something amazing that's happening. And typically it's a lot of code that's still in some kind of waterfall test mode because the team hasn't been able to work in a continuous delivery sense. But sometimes it's just more hope. Any questions or comments on those? First question of the day wins a prize.
Are you asking for a question about the whole...
Just on the first two. Anything? No. Okay. All right. Jackson wins the prize.
Sorry.
My question was first.
Oh, sorry.
Yours was first, but then you said you shook your head. You didn't want it. No. Yeah, explain with me. Explain with me. Yes, Jaksha.
I don't. For me, I struggle a little bit with Jacob because I've seen it too many times, and it's hard to identify when it's a smell and when it's genuine.
Yeah.
Most of the times it has been genuine because people have not been able to push their code, and suddenly there are lots of cards and tests, and you have a big fat column of tests, and there are days when you don't have anything.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So none of these are black and white, but if you start seeing multiple of these, if you've got the team talking about they hope, and they've got this J curve going, then it's maybe something's not quite right there. These are all just maybe, but yes, good point. Constantly broken build. So the build light's always red. What does that smell tell you? Question. Someone who's online, would you like to comment? If you see a constantly red build light, what does that tell you?
Ownership. There's not enough ownership of the stories through.
I'll answer it.
Yeah.
No one's paying any attention to the build.
Okay, yeah. And what does that mean? What's the deeper problem underneath that?
That either they have tests that are really not reliable, so they're really not very useful, or they have flaky tests, so they've stopped acknowledging them, or they really just don't care. And
so there's those problems, those delivery problems that you mentioned there, and technical problems, but underneath that, maybe there's a problem with the team dynamics. People are not talking about the real issue. People perhaps have given up emotionally. Like you said, I wouldn't believe that any thought worker would not care, but the team's overwhelmed. Right? So that's obviously a smell we'd have to get out there. Non-updated burn-up, or whatever you want to call it, the big visible indicator of your progress is an iteration or two behind. Hello, Katie. So that's a smell. Probably don't need to tell you why. Either people are not making progress and they don't want to make that public, or the team's overwhelmed, or the IM's overwhelmed, or for some reason. But actually, this is one that you must always make sure that you have your progress visible on the wall, and that's really important. We'll get into the reasons for that later. If you are in an environment where you have what we call RAG reporting, wonderful RAG reporting, red, amber, green, always be amber. Always be amber. Go amber. Don't go green. People think you haven't got the eye on the ball. Don't go red. Everyone will come piling on top of you. Just be constantly amber. Not really. But if you get a team that is constantly reporting green, green, always green, it's always great. What's that potentially smell of? I mean, that sounds good, right, if they're all green. Eric?
Watermelon projects.
Watermelon project. Yes. Can someone explain what that is?
Well, it seems like it's all green from the outside, but when you just cut through the skin, you realize that everything is not according to what it's supposed to be. It's basically shit.
Yep. These are not the droids you're looking for. It's green on the outside. Everything's great. I'm not saying that's definitely the case. These are all just smells. It could actually be a really gelled team constantly delivering beautiful value. Eric?
Well, yeah, something else is that the team might not be stretching themselves and trying to improve all the time. They're just coasting and they're going along.
Brilliant. That's a great comment. So, yeah, shouldn't you be amber sometimes to try and, push the boundaries? Right?
And the other thing is if you're reporting inaccurately and then the client recognizes that, they'll lose confidence in your ability to control and be transparent with who you are.
Absolutely, and underneath that, you're screwed anyway. So, yes, that's right. And we can talk about that later too. Good point. Team deferring to some guy without discussion is a smell. Interesting one. There's a person in the room. They're not the product owner. They're not the tech lead. But the team seems to be just kind of deferring to them. They may or may not be a member of the team. Half the time they're not. The person just says that they do something. The team's like, yeah, great. Yeah, of course, we'll do that. What's that a smell of?
It may result in scope creep or things which are not meant to be done, and you end up doing those because someone just asked you to do those and you didn't think whether they really need to be done or not.
People in organisations have all sorts of agendas. Sometimes they want to get their own stuff done. Or it could just be someone with a very strong personality in that room, in the team or outside of the team. Everyone's just decided it's easier just to defer to them. What happens if that's the case? Like if Dan, for example, if I just constantly always say yes to Dan, everything that Dan Sampson-Gower wants, we just do straight away.
You're serving only one person in the organisation while your stakeholder might be someone else.
Yeah, what else could it mean? That's true.
Can I say something here?
Please.
I think it's referring to the team dynamics, and part of the problem, what it could lead to could be like a blow up, because someone will just keep piling up things, and then eventually there will be a huge conflict at some point.
Exactly. So I might be actually a little bit afraid of Dan, because Dan Sampson-Gower is known to be an extremely confrontational person. And it's easier just to defer to him. And the next while the team's sort of going in this direction, Dan has this kind of really informal sort of power. In a healthy team should be asking questions. You should be asking, not everything, that's painful, but you should be asking questions, especially about important decisions. So, some guy, a team without conflict is a smell. What's this about? No conflict at all. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, you're awesome. You're awesome. Hey, Katie, you're awesome. Jackson, you're awesome. Dan's awesome. Mm-hmm. Sorry?
Not being open, and potentially is not a safe environment to work together collaboratively.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah, absolutely. So actually a team without conflict is on the very bottom layer of the 5 dysfunctions of a team. They're probably not actually, what's the second layer actually? They've just got enough trust to kind of just have this sort of fake harmony, but they don't have enough trust to be able to challenge each other on stuff. So a little bit of conflict is absolutely healthy. Unresolved conflict is toxic. People who create a lot of drama and conflict around themselves in teams, very unhelpful. But a high-functioning team, you should be looking forward to coming to work, and partly because you're thinking oh, it's going to be really interesting today. There's this big question we have to decide, and there's going to be a lot of vigorous debate about it. Right? So a little bit of conflict is a good thing in a team if it's all done the right way. Yes.
So I hope by conflict here you're not talking. You're talking about disagreement, and as opposed to what could be negative conflict.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk to Dan, and calling each other names. That's what you're referring to.
Right? No, I don't want teams to be calling each other's names. I said they're talking about disagreement, but it can also be even a little bit of conflict, so long as that gets resolved. To have an expectation of a team with no conflict in it is probably unrealistic. It probably means that issues are being not surfaced.
But what if the team has been working together and they've kind of gone over that phase where we now all know each other's work?
They're in the zone.
Exactly.
That's great. Depends what you mean by conflict then. They can have very, very vigorous discussions, and that's extremely healthy. Yes. And their opinions will be in conflict with each other. And you might even hear, walking into that room, you might think, oh my God, But actually, you're right, this team is at the top of that pyramid. They have complete trust. They know that this thing is important, even if other people think that it is not. Some detail they're discussing, and they will hold those positions very passionately.
Okay. So they're not conflict in the way that we would think about that we're almost coming to blows. It's more about exchanging ideas.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. Not like coming to blows. Okay. Yeah. Sorry?
Could I ask a question?
Please.
What if you have a team member who's conflict prone or conflict enabler, and is the person in the position of power?
Okay, so we are going to deal with that later. I've got a bit of a section on conflict resolution. Is it okay if we park that for now?
Sure.
Yeah, because that's a sort of a separate issue. But yeah, Alan's just writing that down. Thank you. PO only attends showcase and is not part of the team. I don't think I need to explain that one. Product owners only showing up at showcase. They don't show up any other time. There's a bunch of PowerPoint getting around. Not a great situation to be in. You've got it, haven't you? Can you advance it, please? There we go. Yeah, go back one. Did we miss one?
I feel like there was two of the same.
Okay, do you know? All right.
Yeah.
Oh, there's two the same. Weird. Okay, Deb's commit on red builds is a smell. Doesn't probably mean a lot of, that kind of relates back to the always green. In the case where you do have like a testing column and you've got a lot of manual testing going on, there's a lot of cards in the testing column, but developers are just picking up work and just going straight onto the next card. What's that smell about?
It's just one person's response. Like it tends to be that you don't have a funnel going on over here. You start, stop, and pick up, and testing just becomes one person's responsibility and lacking collaboration.
Perhaps people aren't pitching in quite enough to help with this situation. The same person always investigating broken builds. Again, team board out of date. Again, city burn-ups. It's another smell. Okay, yeah. Showcase is always delivered by the PM. Right, here we are at PM Bootcamp. Really bad idea. All right. So at the start, when people are really digging in and like this is just something you can take care of for the team, that makes a lot of sense to me. But once the team's in flight and going along, shouldn't we be sort of moving that around the team? Shouldn't we be passing on skills and providing opportunities for feedback and growth for everybody to be doing that? Yeah, I believe you should. There are no risks and there are no issues. You ask the team, are there any risks that you have to deal with? Are there any issues that are hitting you right now? No, there aren't any. That's actually quite unusual. Again, possible, but these are all just smells, just things to look out for. They're not definitely, oh my God, this thing's here, everything's broken. Showcase without working software. Lots and lots and lots and lots of stories in flight. Stories staying blocked for a very long time. So the Brazilians have a great answer for this. I'm very passionate about boards and cards. And Katie Marco is in the room. She and I at Lonely Planet, we were very, very passionate about this stuff. And I got really interested in how could you have a card where you could see from the card how long it had been around. And they have this feature in Trello now, and I was just ecstatic. You can actually see them aging. And we investigated like visitor badges. We would get visitor badges from security because they sort of slowly go black over time to see how long since they've been issued, all this sort of stuff. The Brazilians just went, you idiots, we've already solved it. And we're going, what's the solution? The Brazilian said, you put a little square of banana on the card. Right. Not only is that thing going to go black, but it's going to start smelling really bad. After kind of the time frame you want, like a week or something. So thank you, Brazilians. Unhealthy silence in the team room. Again, like constant agreement on everything, furious agreement. Could be great, but it could be that team's not quite trusting each other yet. But also, teams under a lot of stress or where there's conflict that's not surfaced and not being talked about, you often get this kind of unhealthy silence. Huge stories. Hopefully I don't need to talk about that. All right. Are there any delivery smells that you can share with me? I'm always trying to collect them. Leah, any thoughts? Zoe, anyone else on the call?
This is Nikki. One that I've sort of, I don't know if it's a smell or it's something that I guess it could be, is if people don't actually understand what their roles are, particularly if you've got PMs, BAs, UX, is like a lot of sort of soft skill roles, and then throw in PO, program manager, and particularly client PMs as well. So sort of you step on each other's toes, and it's usually too late. It's quite late in the time before you sort of figure it out.
Yeah, I agree. Particularly where decisions are made. You see people arguing or getting really involved in decisions that are actually not theirs to make. And so getting that sort of stuff clear can be super helpful. Any other thoughts there? I would just add, you've reminded me one there of teams not clear on the objective. If everyone in that room can't explain exactly where you're trying to get to, in the short term, at least in the medium term, something's probably wrong. Maybe you're going brilliantly and you just, you are able to respond very, very quickly. But like, what's the larger goal? And that's not the PM that should be able to answer that. It's absolutely everyone.
I have another one.
Yeah.
No retros. No time for.
Oh yeah. That's a good one. You write that one down, Ellen. That's fantastic. Exactly. What's that a sign of?
A lot. It's part of that team dynamics that we were talking about. Sometimes they're just avoiding the conflict. Sometimes it's just trying to get everything done too fast and not stopping to learn and improve and ask the tough questions and reflect. It's a cause of a lot of problems. And
Absolutely.
it happens a lot.
Yeah, it happens a lot. And I really get it, like, especially when you're really under deadline pressure. Teams will often say, we haven't had time to retro. But I'm sorry, you just need to find a way, even if you find like a lightning retro or a quick way to surface issues. Sometimes those teams will be, decompressing over drinks or something after work. Like, can you just do something to make sure that you're reflecting on those issues? Otherwise, you're probably recreating the same situation that's making everyone miserable right now. So that is actually a super common smell and a really, really good one. Thank you.
I was going to come up with something very similar, which is the non-stop. Oh, we haven't got time to think about this. Why are you doing this? We've always done this, and this is how. And that's a big smell. I'm sort of smelling that at the moment.
We don't have time to think about this. Yeah, but it's important. Important thing. Yeah.
I've had. I think you've got product owner only attends the showcase and is not part of the team as a smell. But I would also say just doesn't have time for the team. If the product owner just doesn't have time, is too busy, then it makes me worry, is the team working on the right thing?
Yeah.
Or are you on a zombie project where you're just carrying on but they haven't had time to stop it, or the will?
Yeah, good point. That's
or
a good one.
8 product owners. I've had that before.
8 product owners, that's a great smell. People nodding in the room here. And that's not necessarily on that person. Like, we put absolutely ridiculous loads on people in organisations. Some of these people that they say they don't have time, they don't. You look at their diaries. Some of them are. I used to work with a product owner who was triple booked for every single hour of the day, and he just had to choose and constantly manage which 2 people he was going to disappoint. And that's insane. And so, don't hold it against the person, but that's a situation that needs resolution. How would you try and resolve that one?
Try and talk to their leadership and see if there's something that can be done to help them remove their load.
I think so, yeah. Or perhaps your senior stakeholder, even better, talking to their senior stakeholder to say, this person's trying to do a great job, but they're not able to. Is there someone else who could possibly do this? Yep.
I'd try and help him out where I can, but also do something, like trade-off sliders or show value visually to help them explain to their people, particularly from a consultant client point of view, what we can do, because you can't work on it all.
Yeah.
And what your cost of delays and all of that stuff that we know about and that they just may not, because they're just too busy running the hamster wheel.
Yeah, exactly. That's a really good idea. And also, I've seen situations here where actually the team are not respecting how busy this person is on the client side. And so you need to respect that. You need to make sure that every minute of their time is being well spent. So you are more prepared than you would normally be. You're using every scrap of time that you can with them. And the other thing is to check sort of outside of normal times. Like, is it possible we could have a coffee at 8:30 and we can talk about this? Then I'll be very prepared. I'll make good use of your time. Those sorts of things. Like, you sometimes you might need to push a little harder. All right.
Nick,
oops.
Can I add another one that is on a portfolio level?
Good, yeah.
Planning too far ahead, like 5 years in advance, or having a huge Gantt chart that has too many estimations but too far ahead. So usually they're looking at those as commitments as well, and that's a big sign.
That's great. Yeah, I would add, actually, that's a really good one. We're writing that one down. And I would add also, estimate is a commitment. So, some poor tech lead, someone's walked up to them and asked them to give an estimate. They've given that estimate, and the person has forgotten that is only a guess with the best information they had at the time. Usually they're asked this question when they have almost none. And that now becomes a commitment, but you said. And that's very common, and there's good reasons for that happening, but it's a conversation that is just burning to be had.
You know what? I heard something funny the other day. When you do estimates in T-shirt sizing, people are looking at that as commitments, I tell them, you know what? Sometimes you gain weight and that T-shirt won't fit you anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Like, no, I'm triple XL. I really am. I'm totally triple XL, like I told you. Yeah.
Another one which I've seen quite often is BAs or PMs are asked to estimate on behalf of the team.
Oh my God, yeah, that's a good smell. Yeah, or bad smell. Yeah.
And like I've seen a situation where that's not gone very well. It's like,
yeah. And these are all, like, if you remember from last time I had that video of Martin Fowler talking about how things were in the bad old days, like that's absolutely what used to happen. And it is what happens in other forms of engineering, civil engineering and other places. But that's a huge anti-pattern for us, obviously. All right.
Hi, Nick. Can I add a couple of things?
Excellent. I'll put these on the slides. Yeah.
I wanted to say one thing I've seen before is that people don't know who their stakeholders are or who's paying for them to be there. Or what's in the SOW. Yeah. And the other one is I've seen teams that don't know who within ThoughtWorks they can reach out to for help.
Brilliant. Really good point. Yep. Sometimes ThoughtWorks will actually have an engagement lead, but it hasn't been really made clear this person is actually the lead. And that's an anti-pattern that we have to totally own. We're trying to fix. And Nicola is so right. Like, find out who's paying for this. That's one of the first questions I always ask when people start talking about stakeholders. In that very first cup of coffee, when you're trying to figure out like vaguely what is the goal, the next thing is like who's paying for it. I don't ask like who's making the decision, like who's paying for it, because ultimately that person who's paying for it is going to be your ultimate decision maker. And they might say, oh, it's the vice president of engineering, or it's actually the head of product for this whole area. I will store that conversation in my mind because that's actually your chief stakeholder. That's actually your decision maker. No matter what the name badge says or, some person says, that's ultimately where that's going to go. So really important to know who that person is and then try and have coffee with them. Any more smells? This is good.
So I don't know if it's related to delivery, but one thing which I've observed is constant roll-off and roll-ons.
Yeah.
Where like for me, if the engagement is 6 months and you have 4 people rolling off and off every month, is not good for the client.
Yeah.
And like I've been part of those conversations where this has happened. So it's not good for the health of the team or the delivery at the client side.
Yeah. And on the client side, like on both sides, on the ThoughtWorks, there are no sides, sorry. With the ThoughtWorks people and the client people, you can see that boiling sort of team with lots of people coming and going. It's not a formula for success. Yeah. I mean, look, we could have Pam Stone or Adam Hope or any of our amazing delivery support people talk about these things all morning. And I will add those to the deck. I'm grateful for your contributions. That's really helpful. We're about halfway through. So any questions before we go ahead into the next bit? Everyone good? Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. It's all good? Silence is assent. All right. So this is called We're Not Going to Make It. So remember before I was talking about, I reckon there's sort of 5 or 6 delivery conversations that keep coming up over and over again. There's one of them is called You've Got an Ugly Baby, which is I'm not going to tackle today. I don't really have a good answer for that, unfortunately. But that's one they often talk about in consulting skills course. It's almost all about that. It's sort of how do you tell truth to power? How do you actually state what is true about something that people really, really value, some of the values? That's not the topic for today. Today we're going to talk about we're not going to make it. And this is a really common and quite scary conversation in delivery. And the reason I've got it in this course is that this is right in the middle of your territory. It's kind of an important part of what you're getting paid for. The infinite Nicholas. Okay, we're not going to make it. So this is where, we were talking before about when you need your project management thinking hat on, and it's not all the time. It's really not. If you are working in a really high trust environment with lots of sort of small, like proper continuous delivery and good, flexible decision making around that, people optimizing for value, all that good stuff, these things are less likely to come up, but they'll probably still come up sometime. Basically, your important stakeholders have an expectation of X. There's a date involved, and you know that is not going to happen. Your team knows it. The is thing is not going to happen. So you're walking around with this knowledge in your head, not for very long, and it's very stressful. So what does good look like in that conversation? And what do you actually want to get out of it, and what can you do to try and help it come out well? It's always going to be a difficult one. So yeah, you're kind of, you see that little boat there. it's like, it's kind of like, all right. So next, okay, where to have it and why. So Dan, can you come up here for me? So I'm going to just face Dan here, and I'm going to say, I think you're on camera, Dan. You just come to
we have Dan and Dan.
Where were you last night?
Don't tell the wife at the pub.
Right. Okay, you see that? So I'm facing Dan. I'm looking right at him, and I'm saying, where were you last night? He's immediately got his hackles up. He's immediately gone. He's not going to open up in this situation, right? Now imagine this, like we're driving down the road. I was the left-hand drive car. No, you drive, Dan.
No,
I'll be driving. Okay. Or you're doing the dishes, right? I call this the dishes effect. And I'm like, what did you do last night, Dan?
Well, you know, just hung out with the boys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He's still not being very open, but anyway, go sit down. But the idea is that, yeah, if there's something about human beings to do with, one is to do with sharing food. That's why we often, we say like, hey, let's have a piece of cake and talk about this. But there's another one about sort of not being face on with someone. Think about all the great conversations you've had driving down the road, right? In families, like I have teenagers, it's doing the dishes. It's a great time to do that. So I'm not confronting you. I'm not looking straight into your eyes and saying, what did you do? I'm next to you and I'm saying, oh, what did you do? And it's just easier for that person to open up, and you're going to get a more human response. So I'm suggesting there's only one place I want to have this conversation. So I want to control where that place happens. So I need to tell someone that we're not going to make it and why. I want to have that in front of some kind of progress chart with us both looking at it. Okay? So we're both standing here and we're both looking at this chart, because I can see, everyone can see, like it's just a piece of visual logic, like any human walking around can see that this is going to hit that red line on the, the 4th of May or somewhere in there, whatever that is, in May, okay? If someone's thinking that it's going to hit this line here, clearly they are deceived. That would require that J curve we were talking about before. So I want to be in front of some sort of visual evidence, compelling visual evidence. This is using a part of the brain, the precognitive part of the brain, a very old part of the brain that does visual recognition, okay? And so I want this conversation, I can't have this person leaving this conversation thinking, oh, look, maybe it'll be okay. And I'm not going to lead them down that path. We're going to be brutally honest. And when you're standing in front of this, it's just a lot easier through this very simple visual explanation, whatever kind of visual planning you're using, for us all to see that line is going to finish there. We can have and we will entertain how we could change the slope of that line, but we would have to agree that if nothing changed, effectively it was going to be here, and that less magic of some form happened, that date was not going to be okay. So I want you to have this conversation right in front of the wall and standing next to the person looking at the chart, and so that they can actually see what's likely to happen unless something changes. Yes?
What happens if that person is not in the same room as you? I once had to have a conversation like that when I was in Uganda and the client was in New York.
Yeah, I can't teleport you. It's really hard. But you can have this in front of both of you. You both can still be looking at this on a shared screen. But yeah, you can't do that thing. And that's true of increasing amounts of remote work. And it's really hard because it's very hard to build trust over remote. You don't get the human effect of working together and building trust. So delivering bad news. So what you need to bring is basically facts, alignment, and options, I would say. So in this conversation and in preparing for any stressful conversation, and this is usually a bit of a stressful conversation, facts are absolutely your friend. By which I mean a fact is something that can be agreed on and observable by all parties. Okay, so for example, like the slope of that line, that would be something like cycle time. Don't show up at this discussion without, something like cycle time, points, whatever you have, dates, times, every time you say a fact, it just builds a little brick in the credibility of your case, because the worst case, remember, is somebody leaving the room thinking everything's going to be okay. Now, I hope Ange is okay for me to share this story. This is a story from Lonely Planet. Ange was leading an enormous piece of work out there that was really important for us and also really important for ThoughtWorks, I now know. And the head of delivery was there. And she basically had that chart, and she brought all of the senior people together on the Lonely Planet side, and her message was basically, we're not going to make it. But the senior, and this was not her fault, but the senior person on Lonely Planet side basically stood up in that meeting and said, yes, we are going to make it. And everyone could see that that was not the case. So even though she wasn't able to bring that person along on that journey, and she was right in the end about the dates, everybody in the room was with her. And so that was because she had the evidence. If she'd gone in there with something vague, forget about it, right? So make sure you have your evidence. Alignment. Yeah.
Nick, how do you deal with that when the senior stakeholder or the person in power says, yes, we are?
Well, you need to, you will have reporting in place. So we'll get to the end, like how to try and not be in this position, but you will be broadcasting these facts, as much as you possibly can. And ultimately that person, since there is no magic, is not going to be right. And because you've used facts and you have the alignment, ultimately that person is going to be shown to have been wrong in this case. There's no, even in that room, if you've got a strong argument that makes a lot of sense to people about how we got to where we are and what the facts of the case are, ultimately that person, no matter how senior they are, is going to be ultimately not going to win out in this situation. But that's a bad situation. I've only ever seen it happen once. So alignment. So you can't get up there and firstly, you make sure your team is aligned. So your team is telling you that this date is not going to happen. So you make sure you have the full alignment of your team. So whatever you're going to go and tell other people, anyone needs to be able to walk up to your team and get the exact same story, right? So, and you're not going to be blaming other teams. So if your answer is, it's just too much scope, we've been going as fast as we can, consistently we've hit such and such velocity or cycle time, or we're going at this sort of pace, and it's just not going to be possible for that date without cutting scope. Make sure that the whole team knows that. So there's not inconsistent stories getting out there. That's then another problem that you're going to have to solve. So make sure that you're aligned, and the timing is really, really important of who you tell. So your whoever it is that's the sponsor of your project is the very first person after the team to know this information. And then you take guidance from them about who else gets to know it when. That gets really important. I'll tell you why later. Obviously that makes sense, right? The worst possible thing you could do is for other people to have already told your sponsor this. They already hate you at this point. You're like, how could you do that to me? I'm your sponsor and I'm finding this out from other people. Right? They're living their own lives. They're in a tricky organisational situation, and you've just given them another problem to deal with. So make sure that as soon as the team knows and you've got the story straight, you understand what the facts are and you can show what the facts are, make sure that that sponsor is the very next person to know. Whether that's a particularly pleasant relationship or not is absolutely irrelevant. All right, so that alignment's really, really important. So once I've told the team and this person, I need to make sure, there'll be sort of, the head of delivery or whatever, I need to make sure that those things get, sort of the traditional reporting lines, if you like, whoever that is. Usually if it's a program of work, the head of the program needs to know, but also the teams on either side of me. We're going to do a whole session on dependencies. Usually in life, you have dependencies, right, in delivery. So other people depend on you. So you have a huge obligation to get talking to them as quickly as possible. And I would recommend that that's technical people talking to technical people. Always works best at that level, right? So tech lead to tech lead, you need to understand you depend on this in this specific way. We are not going to be there for that day, okay? After you've done what, make sure your sponsor knows. All right, any questions? Because I've got more. So where are we up to with time? Okay, we have 15 minutes. Right. So alignment, facts, alignment. Here's probably the most important part that I think people usually skip over. remember that we were saying about programs, right? Usually your work is related to other people's. Your story about this, I'm not going to make this, shouldn't actually be, we're not going to make this. That's not the important part. The important part is how will that impact the greater goal? Remember, you are in love with that greater objective that the program has. That's where you're really trying to go. You're just part of that. You're just building, the tunnel or the entry road onto the tollway, whatever it is. You are part of that bigger picture, and you're failing in your job if you don't keep that in mind. So you need to understand the impact this will have, because maybe you're going late actually won't impact the end date at all, right? So that's a really important thing to understand. So your conversation becomes, how is this going to affect others? And the sort of greater goal, how will this affect other teams and other stakeholders? Even if it's not going to affect them, then you still need to bring a lot of humility to this conversation, whether it's your fault or not. Forget about whether it's your fault, that's not useful. But you need to talk about the impact on the greater goal. So we're going to be later than what you were thinking. We think it's probably safe to say that's going to be 2 months later, or a month, or a week, or whatever it is. Now, what you need to know is the impact of this is that Team X could potentially be delayed and Team Y could potentially be delayed. But that's all we know about so far, and we're working to try and minimise those dependencies. This is where dependencies are really, really important. We're going to talk about them in our next episode. So that's the kind of thing you want. And think about, like again, humility, and think about the greater goal, and you should be plugged into the greater program goal, because if there are things like marketing dates or legislative dates, or like the banks are often under, you must have this fixed by, June 30th, that's the thing that this conversation needs to really be about. Do you see? That makes a lot more sense now. It's like, right, this is really serious because it impacts your date of X. That's the kind of conversation you want to have, not, oh, my team's 2 weeks late, but it's not our fault because it's those guys. All right? Think about the greater effect and bring that to that conversation. I know this will affect this team because they have a dependency on us. I understand there might be effect on this, for example, TV advertising. How can we mitigate that? Well, you've already thought about that. All right, most importantly, options. I'm going to talk about options now. So you actually never go into this conversation just purely with a piece of news like, hello, we're going to be late. I don't care how stupid the options are or how hopeless and on fire, with fire on the fire, your options are, right? But you must bring some options, okay? It's really important. It's part of you doing your job, but it also gives the person a little bit of control back in a situation that they feel is out of control, okay? Even if you just have bad ones, you need to think about that, okay? So I want you to think about options. So, and actually, some people are just naturally really good at this. Some of them are in this room. How can you do less? That's a classic one of an option, right? Where do you shave the scope off? People who've worked with Suncorp have probably seen this done, with LSP, like it just happens over and over and over and over again. So when you think about feature depth, that's different to feature breadth. So feature depth is how much work is contained in this feature. My best example of this that I can give from Suncorp is where an entire form that you would fill out as a customer becomes a single JPEG that says, please call the call center. Now, that is not a great outcome for your customer, but sometimes those things do need to be done, and that is an option. And that is an example of feature depth. That feature just went from like 2 weeks' work to 1 JPEG. Okay? Much as people might not want to hear that and might particularly be not wanting to hear it at that moment, when they wake up the next morning, that might start to look really good. So think about feature depth. Feature breadth is more like the number of features. So it's actually better to give a haircut here if you can. Think of ways, talk to your team about, because often it's really unexpected, to me anyway, as like a non-technical person, and I'll find it like in this feature, like where does all the hard work actually live? And I think it's like in the bits that look fancy to me because I'm doing, brain light and I'm not a developer. But the developers will go like, oh no, that's not the hard bit, it's validating the postcode. So, okay, now you've got a conversation with someone about what happens if we don't validate this postcode. What's the bad effect of that? Probably a bad example. But find out where the meat is in that feature and try and strike at that because, now we would only be 2 weeks late because we're not going to validate the postcode. Feature breadth, so actually getting rid of whole features is your next option, but it's probably less palatable. You usually find an answer here because obviously somehow it's going to be, we've got to go faster, we've got to do less. Scope can move to other teams. So again, you've got to take that program view, right? And because you're talking laterally to the other teams that you have already built great relationships with, you've already had that conversation with them of like, well, you're doing the login pages for X, Y, and Z. We're doing the login pages for A, B, and C. Would it be possible that you could put C into your basket? What effect would that have on you? Do you see you're already doing some of that delivery thinking to start to create an option, okay? You can take work away from your team. Now, quality, you think like, well, that's horrible. You would never compromise quality. That's just not true, okay? Quality takes a whole variety of forms. And actually, like if you are putting an entirely huge amount of effort into making sure that a very unlikely bug is not going to happen, and that's going to stop you from delivering that feature, you need to have that discussion with your product owner because maybe they would prefer that. It's actually their money.
Okay. Maybe they know better than you whether it's likely to happen in production.
They will, yeah. Well, the likelihood, possibly the likelihood, certainly the impact. They will know the impact better than you. So I know this sounds bad, but it's real. It's something to think about. If you can do that, and by doing that, you don't slow down all the other teams, and people can actually put the TV ads they booked 6 months ago can happen. Right? Bring options. Adding people. We say this is a bad idea. And yes, it is usually a bad idea. But you need to look at it. Right? How much time do you have until the deadline? If it's 2 weeks, it's certainly a bad idea. If it's 6 weeks, maybe it's worth thinking about. At the very least, you have to show your stakeholder that you have thought about this, because I will guarantee you this is the first thing that they will say. They'll say, right, well, ThoughtWorks can just double the size of this team, because they think it's like digging a hole. And we're not paying a cent, and you're going to put more people on it, We know that doesn't usually work, but you need to be able to show that you've done that analysis and you know that it doesn't work. Okay, because that's also the first person. You've put them in a bad situation, not by your bad work or being a bad person or anything like that, but they now have a problem. They've got people on their back that they need to explain why their part of this is now going to delay the TV ad. That's something the board has visibility of. So they're in hot water. So they need that answer, because that's exactly what the board's going to say. The board's going to say, we'll just put some more people on it. And don't not ask this question, okay? Mm-hmm. Definitely have this conversation with your tech leads and with your developers, and in fact the whole team. How could you go faster? That's where these options are going to come from, right? I've seen cases where people don't even ask this question, and it's going to be this really bad result, but they haven't spoken to the brilliant people they've got in their team about how we could possibly go faster. We've got to talk about it. Here, this is a really key one. We get into dependencies later, but how can you remove a dependency so that either you make up time or your delay doesn't delay others? So there might be some work in your plan that has a finish start relationship with some other piece of work. Like, this needs to be done, single sign-on's a classic, before I can do my bit. Have the conversation and think about how you could remove that dependency, because that could give you some time back. Or if you can remove that dependency, perhaps you won't delay others with your delay. Okay. So what's important? As soon as you have the evidence, you start talking about this. Okay. You should sometimes it'll happen, but as soon as you have understanding and facts and alignment, you need to start broadcasting this message that this is an unrealistic date. It's much, much better. You think those conversations are bad early, you should try them late. And our goal is, remember we had that picture of the dentist? We're saying having a good PM is basically like a dentist. Like, if you have a good one, you kind of don't notice. If you have a bad one, you'll never forget it. No surprises, even good ones. Like, let's say your team's done an absolutely brilliant piece of work that no one was expecting. You've built a prototype that's just amazing, right? You don't just sort of go to showcase and give that to everyone. It's actually your stakeholders. You give it to them, right? So you do not surprise them. You take them out for a coffee and say, wow, there's this fantastic thing. It's going to make you look amazing. You actually say that, but it is going to make them look great. And you're always trying to make them look great. So it's not really about you, so as a PM. So no surprise, that's what I mean, they're even good ones. You certainly do not want to be surprising people at the last minute with this kind of bad news. Now, on this side, on the ThoughtWorks side, your CP is probably knows about this even before you have all of the evidence. Even when you just have a gut feeling, you're already talking to Chelsea or whoever it is that is your CP, and delivery support, whoever that is, whether it's Pam, it's Adam, these people are on your side. They're there to help you get out of this. So as soon as you start to get a smell of it, that's the time to start talking about it. Talk about it early. Remember, talk about that final overall goal, not just your little problem of how late you're going to be. 5 minutes. Protecting your team is super important. Okay, so if there is going to be fallout from this, you're like that guy in the bomb suit. Like you're like Frank. Just blame Frank. Okay, you're the human ablation shield for your team. It's going to be your fault. You're going to be, I screwed up the planning. I didn't put enough fat in it. I didn't think this through. You take that if you possibly can, because that protects the team. And anytime you get an attack on your team, you're going to try and protect that team and take that yourself. You're not going to try and deflect it sideways. If there are difficult conversations where it really was actually this person's fault over here, I would advise you to still take it yourself, then have a coffee with that person and tell them exactly what happened. Okay, but you don't blame others to get out of the shit. The order in which you talk to people, as I said, is incredibly important. You could have all these great options worked out, and actually it's all going to be fine, but it's too bad because the story's already gotten out and the board's already heard about it, that you guys are late, and all of a sudden the skies are falling in on you. Unnecessary. Okay? Not causing unnecessary embarrassment. This is super important. Okay? Like I say, this is someone else's career that's probably on the line here, and the last thing you want to do is embarrass them. Okay? You will go on to another gig. You're a thought worker. This person, this is their job. This is how they they put the food on the table. So you just got to think about who would this be embarrassing to. Try not to cause unnecessary embarrassment. This one here, do remind people that estimates are our best wrong answer. Right? But don't bang on about it. Like that, again, when you give an estimate to somebody, you remind them, and feel free to remind them a couple more times, but don't be just endlessly going on, but we said. It's too late now for that. Feel free to, like I say, touch it, but don't be going on about it. So walking away from this conversation that we're just focusing in on now, what do you want? The most important thing is you need agreement that this is actually the case, that this is happening. That's really, really important. If you're leaving that conversation, you realise that hasn't happened, you have to go rethink, represent to that person. You might even need to think about perhaps finding someone more senior in ThoughtWorks to have the conversation with, perhaps someone more senior on the other end. You want to walk away from this conversation with your stakeholder with a list of what you're going to do next. So here it is. Okay, you need to talk to this person, this person, this person, this person, And very often, if you handle this right, it'll actually be much more low-key than you've been worrying about. And guidance on comms. Who needs to know what in what order? Things to watch out for. Really important one here, schedule chicken. So you are in the world of large organisations where the game of schedule chicken is played. So what happens here is there's a deadline. It's a program of work. There's multiple teams that know that they're going to be late. Let's say there's 10 teams and there's 3 of them that know they're going to miss that deadline. But rather than be the one that puts their hand up for it, this is how schedule chicken is played, they will wait until someone else puts their hand up for it, and then they'll go, oh, bloody Alan's team, they've made us all late, and meanwhile pedal as fast as they can because they were late as well and they knew it. Not much you can do about this one except remember, not your circus, not your monkeys, not your organisation, right? So if someone needs to take a hit. You do not have the same amount at stake as they do. Talk to your stakeholder first, your most important sponsor, and make sure that they're good. But if you play this game and play schedule chicken, you are actually screwing up that bigger goal, which is the one that you actually are trying to achieve. Eric, do you have a question? No, just stretching your arm. All right.
Nick, can I add something to that?
Please.
Which I think everything you're saying is spot on. With your job is not at stake, I think it's worth remembering that the behaviour of some of the other people you might be working with, their job actually may be particularly contractors.
Yeah.
And so having a bit of empathy from where they might be coming from and why they're hiding things or delaying things and whatnot. So just, I guess remembering that.
Yeah, I think that's really true. So we just have 1 minute and what's next? What happens next? Oh yeah, I was going to have some stories, but we probably don't have time for that.
That is so cute.
Next, what's next? Yeah, anything next? Oh yeah, there's a missing R there in my last minute. In the conversation itself, if you've ever done coaching training, there's grow. So that's a good way to use as a model for that conversation. So what's the goal of this conversation? Well, I'm here to tell you some bad news, blah, 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 blah. What is the reality of the situation? Here are the facts, blah, blah, blah. What are the options, blah, blah, blah. Wrap it up and what's next. If that helps to orient you. Don't blame, but you don't need to hide the facts. You can be frank. If fact is something that's agreed by everybody, you should feel absolutely free to state it, okay? And if facts are self-evident and they happen to make other people look bad, well, so be it. But if you need to stick with the facts. If you get bogged down and the person is, freaking out a bit, go back to the higher purpose. You're always talking about that greater end goal. That's just a bit of advice that I'd give you there. We are at time, and I'm not going to make you late for your day. So thank you very much for tuning in, for taking an hour out of your day. And thanks especially for the questions and the discussion. That's what really makes this worthwhile.
We did have this question. We did have one thing we were going to park till later, which was raised by Leo about conflict and positions of power.
That's for my next discussion. We'll talk about conflict resolution, dependencies, a few other things. Cool. Okay, thank you very much. Bye. Have a good day.
See you all.
Thank you.